Alik'r Desert Lore. Motalion Necropolis Report. Unto the Doyen of Satakalam. It was with a heavy heart that this unworthy one must report a cessation of the Motalion endeavor. Circumstances have eventuated that render its continuance inadvisable. Indeed, pursuing the endeavor would doubtless lead to a loss of guild lives, as well as being a sacrilegious, even more so than usual. I hasten to point out that no taint of fault should be inferred as to the perfection of your peerless plan, O my Doyen. Following your instructions, our subversion of the Motalion funerary overseer Pavaz al-Tingos went flawlessly. Indeed, he was willing to accept only 15% of the pillaging proceeds, when we were as willing to go as high as 20%. In the weeks since he agreed to our proposal, the looting of the crypts and mausoleums in the southern quadrant of the necropolis was accomplished according to your Doyenhood's admirably aggressive schedule, despite the back injury suffered by the footpad Quayan in the crypt of the virtuous maidens. The harvesting and sale of the sacred Welkanins was likewise a complete success, and your idea of substituting imitation stones of turquoise glass treated with glow spells has left none the wiser. The cost of paying a farb the illuminary to renew the glow spells once every 10 days is a scarab feed compared to what we were able to realize from the Welkanin stones on a thermatological aftermarket. In hindsight, your advice that we start with the quadrant wherein were interred the most affluent of our ancestors fully justifies the eminent position in which you find yourself, though we refrained, of course, from irreverent treatment of the sarcophagi. The valuable trappings and regalia of the outer tombs were stripped during those periods when Overseer Pavaz had watchmen patrolling elsewhere. It is unlikely that the eastern and western quadrants, where the less prosperous of our brethren are buried, would even together equal the take brought in from the southern. But now I must reluctantly turn to the reason for our regrettable abandonment of your Doyenhood's supremely excellent Motalion endeavor. The northern quadrant, where the authorities have seen fit to bury the corpses of those who were impious or criminal in life, has been afflicted by a horrific rising of the undead. Ra-Natu in numbers have crawled from their crypts, and are now a profane presence across the entire necropolis. This may be due, as I believe, to Overseer Pavaz's sending the watchman too often into the unclean quadrant, or it may be the result of some other desecration. If it was the fault of the Overseer, he has certainly paid the price, as he was one of the first victims of the risen dead. I also regret to report on the death of the footpad, whose back went out in an untimely manner while fleeing from the Ra-Natu at the base of the 99 stairs. His surviving family will receive the usual stipend. With the utmost esteem, Operative Mahfud. Redguards, History and Heroes, Volume 1. Randa Hundig was born 2356 in the old way of reckoning in our beloved deserts of the old land. The traditional rule of emperors had been overthrown in 2012, and although each successive emperor remained a figurehead of the empire, his powers were very much reduced. Since that time, our people saw 300 years of almost continuous civil war between the provincial lords, warrior monks, and brigands, all fighting each other for land and power. Our people were once artisans, poets, and scholars, but the ever-evolving strife made the way of the sword inevitable. The song of the blade through the air, through flesh and bone, its ring against armor, it was an answer to our prayers. In the time of Lord Veranda, the first warrior prince, lords called Ucada built huge stone castles to protect themselves and their lands, and the castle towns outside the walls began to grow up. In 2254, however, Mansell Cesnat came to the fore. He became the Elden Ucada, or military dictator, and for 8 years succeeded in gaining control almost of the whole empire. When Sesnet was assassinated, a commoner took over the government. Randik Torn continued the work of unifying the empire that Sesnet had begun, ruthlessly pulling down any traces of insurrection. He revived the old gulf between the warriors, the sword singers, and the commoners by introducing the restrictions on the wearing of swords. Torn's sword hunt, as it was known, meant that only the singers were allowed to wear swords, which distinguished them from the rest of the population. Although Torn did not much settle the empire into its pre-strife ways, by the time of his death, internal disturbances had still not been completely eliminated. Upon death, the Civil War broke out in earnest, war that made the prior 300 years of turmoil pale in comparison. It was in this period that Franda Hundig grew up. Hundig belonged to the sword singers. This element of empire society grew from the desert artisans and was initially recruited from the young sons and daughters of the high families. They built the first temple to the unknown gods of war and built a training hall, the Hall of the Virtues of War. Within a few generations of the Way of the Sword, the Song of the Blade had become their life. The people of the Blade kept their poetry and artistry in building beautiful swords woven with magic and powers from the unknown gods. The greatest among them became known as the Ansai, or Saints of the Sword. Each of these began their own training schools, each teaching their individual way of the sword. Ansai of the highest virtue wandered the countryside, engaging in battle, righting wrongs, and seeking to end the strife. To summit, Hundig was a sword singer, a master Ansai at the time when the peak of the strife was reborn out of the chaos of Torn's death. Many singers put their swords and became artists, for the pull of the artisan heritage was strong. Others, like Hundig, pursued the ideal of the warrior, searching for enlightenment through the perilous paths of the sword. Duels of revenge and tests of skill were commonplace, and fencing schools multiplied. Redguards, History and Heroes, Volume 2. Franda do Hundig Hel Ansai no Shira, or, as he was commonly known, Franda Hundig, was born in the far desert marches of the province of High Desert. Hundig is the name of the High Desert region near where he was born. Noshira means noble person, or person of noble birth, and Hel Ansai is his title of sword sainthood. Hundig's ancestors reach back to the beginning of recorded time in the High Desert, living as artisans and mystics. His grandfather was a retainer of the Elden Ucada Mansell Sesnet, and led many of the battles of unification prior to his assassination. When Hundig was 14, his father died in one of the many incursions, and he was left to support his mother and 4 brothers. His prowess with the sword, however, made his life both difficult and easy. It was easy that his services came in great demand, and as a guardian and an escort. It was hard that his reputation preceded him, and many awaited their turn to face him in battle, hoping to gain instant fame through his death. By the time Hundig was 30, he had fought and won more than 90 duels, killing all his opponents. He became virtually invincible with sword, gaining such skill and mastery that he finally stopped using physical swords, created through the artistry of the people, and began using the Shihai, or the Way of the Spirit Sword. All sword singers learn through their intense training and devotion to the gods of war and Way of the Sword, the forms of discipline that allow the creation of the Spirit Sword. This is a simple form of magic or mind mastery, whereby an image of the sword is formed from pure thought. The sword singer forms the sword by concentrating, and it takes the shape in his hand. It is usually a pale thing of light, misty and insubstantial, a thing of beauty, perhaps, or a symbol of devotion to the way and to the gods, but no weapon. However, those Ansai of the highest level, and their sensitivities, and those with latent magic, can, in times of stress, form a spirit sword, a Shahai, that is far more than light and air. It is an unstoppable weapon of great might, a weapon that can never be taken from the owner without also taking their mind. The Shahai became Hundig's weapon, and with this he killed brigands and wandering monsters infesting the land. Finally, upon finishing his 90th duel, Defeating the evil Lord Janik and his 7 lich followers, he was satisfied that he was indeed invincible. Hunting then turned, formulating his philosophy of the way of the sword. He wrote his learnings down in the Book of Circles while living as a hermit in the cave in the mountains in the high desert in his 60th year. In that year, Hundig, having enlisted in the many battles of the Empire and having defeated all opponents, had thought himself ready for death. He retired to his cave to capture his strategy and mystical visions to share with other sword singers. It was after his completion of the Scroll of the Circle that the singers found him composing his death poem and preparing to join the gods of war in final rest. At 60, he was a vigorous man who thought himself through with life, but his people, the sword singers, needed him. They needed him as never before. Redguards, History and Heroes, Volume 3. Tom's sword hunt had separated singers from common people, and the rise of the last emperor began the last great strife of the Desert Empire. The emperor and his consort Elissa's final effort was to wrest control of the empire from the people by destroying the sword singers. Hera vowed to search out every singer with his brigand army comprised of orcs and cast-offs from the war of the empire, and to scourge them from the face of the planet. Sword singers were never a numerous people. The harsh desert kept the births few, and growing up in an unforgiving waste eliminated all those but of iron spirit and will. Thus the final strife, when it became known as the War of the Singers, found the people of the sword unprepared and unready to join together their individually great skills into an army that could defend their home and their lives. Brandar Hundig was sought out, his death poem interrupted, and unceremoniously command of the singers was thrust upon him. To the unknown gods of war, great thanks is owed that Hundig had the time in his cave to write down his years of accumulated wisdom, of strategy, of the ways of the Shahai. The singers fled from their camps up into their desert hills and mountains, fled to the foot of the Hatu, the father of mountains, where Hundig had gone to write in peace and to die. There those remnants formed into the army of the Circle. They learned Hundig's way, his strategies, his tactics, and the final great vision for a master stroke. Hundig devised a plan of 7 battles, leading the armies of the Hera further and further into the wilderness, to the foot of the Hatu, where the final battle could be fought. Hundig called his plan the Hammer and the Anvil. With each battle, Hundig's singers would further learn his strategy and tactics, grow strong in the use of the Shahai, and be ready to deal with their opponents in the 7th battle. And thus it was. The 6 first battles were waged, each neither victory nor defeat, each leading to the next. The larger armies of the Hera following the small army of the Hundig. Outnumbered 30-1, the singers never faltered from the way. The stage was set. Hera and his army maneuvered the base of Hatu Mountain, where the hammer blow was delivered. The battle was pitched, and many singers fell that day. Hundig knew that the singers who lived would be few, but Hera and his evil empire would not, and so it went. At the end, Hundig and less than 20,000 singers survived the day, but no army of evil was left to pillage and murder. More than 300,000 fell on that day on Hatu. Of those who were left to run and live, all were scattered to the 4 winds, an organized force no more. The singers packed their lives, folded their tents, mourned their dead, and followed Hundig to the great port city of Arch, in the province of Seawind. There Hundig had a flotilla of ships waiting, and the singers left their desert for a new land. No longer welcome in their desert empire, they left to be sung about and spoken of in legend. The final great warrior, the singers of Shahai, the Book of Circles, all leaving that land where their virtue was unappreciated. Red with blood they were in the eyes of the gentle citizenry, never mind that they had saved them from a great evil. The singers vowed to learn new ways as they travelled across the great ocean to their new land, to adopt a new name, but to honor the past. The honor of the final battle, they named their new land Hammerfell, and adopted the name Redguards. In honor to Hundig, A great warrior prince, each household in Hammerfell has a place by the hearth, an alcove, just a niche, but big enough to hold the scroll, the Book of Circles. I hope you're enjoying these readings. Let me know in the comments below. And come follow me over on twitch.tv/ICYIC, where I stream Elder Scrolls Online 4 days a week. See you there.